welcome to the Paterfamilias podcast. This is Adrian, your host. Thank you for joining us for this second episode. I'm a little late on it. I apologize for that. I'm trying to get these out on Mondays, but with a family, sometimes things come up. I'm doing this on the side, so I get to it when I can. But today, first thing I want to go over is a little bit about the last episode with the Selco article I was reading y'all. That was a good article that I read, and it really opens your eyes to the situation of someone who's actually been there, who's actually been in a situation where we have a lot of insecurities about day-to-day activities. Where he was at, it became such an issue that they couldn't even go out during the day, and it really wasn't advisable for them to even leave their home or their compound at all. And when they did, it became a very risky enterprise. Not to say that situation can happen here, but it also doesn't mean that it can't. It is possible here. I was just remarking to my daughter today, actually, that the life that we live right now in the United States is an anomaly in history. The fact that we are so secure and we are so soft in our day-to-day living that your average person can make up problems because they don't have enough problems in their life. The average person doesn't have to worry about where their food comes from because they can just go down to, within my house here, we probably have 3 supermarkets within 5 miles of my house. And that is really, it's unheard of in the entire history of the world, having access to that much food and not having to provide any of it yourself. Just think, the average person doesn't even know how to clean a chicken, right? To kill it and then remove the feathers and then how to, to dress it and you take the guts out and then how to prepare it from there. All they have to do is if they want 3 pounds of chicken breasts for their family, because they're making, chicken Parmesan, they just go down to the store, pay now? It's probably like $4 or $5 a pound right now, but, and they just pick it up and they bring it home and they cook it. There was no need to worry about there is no need now to worry about where your food comes from because everything is given to us. And it's so simple. And it's a stark contrast of what has been seen throughout history. So I want to go a little bit over this article real quick, and then I want to go into what it means for us and what kind of some of the things that are coming down the pipe that should really help you to solidify in your mind why you need to start preparing yourself and your family for hard times that are most likely coming ahead. So I'm going to go through the bullet points of the article, and I'll post the article again in the show notes. That way you all can read along if you like. Or you can go back and listen to the previous episode, and I number them off as it goes through the article like he does in his article. But let me just go through them. So the first one he was talking about is going, how to move safely in a city. He wasn't able to use automobiles because there's wreckage everywhere. And that gasoline was very expensive. The average person today cannot walk or will not walk more than 5 miles. And I know you've got shows like The Walking Dead, or if anybody's ever read 1 Second After by William Fortune, or 1 year, I think it's 1 year later, 1 second later, or 1 year, anyway. And then he also followed books called 1 Year Later, where people are just walking in droves to find places where they can go to find food. I don't think that's going to be the case any longer. I think people are going to hunker down where they're at and just begin to take what they need. If you look at the average person, they throw a fit if they have to drive more than a couple of miles to get something to eat, right? So for them to be worried about bands of roving people looking for food or shelter or whatever, I don't think that's going to be an issue because people are not going to have the conditioning to be able to do that. So people are going to try and use vehicles at first if they can. if the situation allows for it, which is going to cause a lot of breakdowns. You're going to have a lot of stalled vehicles all over the place in the event of, say, a EMP or a coronal mass ejection. One of these events that happen, you're going to have automobiles everywhere. So he was talking about, not only that, even if you had the access to it, the gasoline is going to be very expensive because the supply and demand is going to be ratcheted up by the lack of logistics. Now, as we're seeing now, our logistics issue is becoming apparent even to your average American. If you go to Walmart right now, and if you need to pick up certain items, like say you're looking for, like I was at Walmart the other day, and I wanted to get some salt, just some iodized salt, and they barely had the little 1 pound cylinders. Before, it wasn't even like a month ago, they had no salt whatsoever. I do a lot of barbecuing and such, so we use a lot of salt for, when I make my own dry rubs and such. So I noticed that immediately. And then I've listened to other podcasts and some guys who have explained what they've seen out on the road as well. Well, logistics is going to be an issue here soon. So if you are needing to travel more than a couple of miles from your house to get things you need to live on a day-to-day, and I'm not talking about you need batteries or you need, shampoo. Those aren't going to be things that you need at that point. Say there's a societal collapse of some sort. You're not going to need those things any longer. Those are not going to be your staples that you're going to need to sustain your daily living. In my time in Afghanistan, there comes a point where you stop smelling yourself, right? There comes a point where you can no longer smell the stench that you have or the guys that you're around with, because you become so used to it. And if any of you've ever taken any microbiology or anatomy, you know that your nerves and your sensory capability will eventually cap out on how many senses it can take, and then it just numbs it out, right? And so that would explain, things like, well, after a while, like I said, you'll no longer smell something, right? So moving safely in a city, you're going to need to be able to move in at least, 2 to 3 people. That way you can keep some semblance of security. And then moving on, he's talking about how, what do they do for wood to keep their wood, their homes warm? And the lack of burning wood, they ended up burning even their furniture and things like that. I live here in the South. The winters don't get that cold. I think this year they got down to maybe the 20s at most, but it was only for like a day or two, which isn't that cold. If you're inside a house, and you've got shelter and you're sheltered away from at least the weather, 20 degrees inside a house isn't that bad. I mean, yes, it's cold. It's not going to be comfortable, but you can bundle up and you can stay active to be able to stay warm. And then, going on further down, he's talking about what he would do if he had 3 months to prepare. And, he's going into some things that, and his overarching theme almost every time was have weapons, have ammo, have people that can use them, right? And, I know a lot of guys will harp on, like, oh, you don't need as so much, firearms and ammo as much as you need training how to use it. Yes, that's good. But if you, like going back to earlier to the logistics issue, if you don't have access to get any more, you need as much as you can get from the get-go. And yes, having training is always better. I am a big advocate of always going out and paying someone to train you. Even if you are what you think you are experienced in using a firearm, I guarantee you if you go to a class where a guy's been teaching it for a while and he has a good reputation, he's going to teach them things that you didn't think of. I used to teach Marines primary marksmanship in the Marine Corps, and I still, I go out and I seek training wherever I can. So you do need training, but training does you no good if you don't have access to the bullets to be able to use with that training. Um, they're also in what you should stockpile, and he was looking more for, and he was commenting more on barter items like anything food or hygiene, alcohol, things like that, lighters. He's talking about being able to sell lighters because being able to start a fire, a lot of people don't know how to do it, without using some type of flammable um, means, whether it be lighter fluid or a lighter of some sort, or maybe even be like, like I make cotton balls soaked in petroleum jelly for when I start my grill. Most people don't know how to do that, and they've never had to do that because we live such soft lives. So keeping those things in mind, being able to hoard, not really hoard things, but to stockpile. It's a euphemism for hoard, but to be able to stockpile things that you can trade later on, things that you may not need, because in a societal collapse, or even say there's a balkanization of the United States, your money is not going to be worth anything. It's already not worth much. I mean, if you consider the fact that 70% of the currency in the flow right now of the United States within the market has been printed in the last year. Also, keep in mind, 20% of all money ever printed in the United States, ever from the founding in 1776, was printed last year. Right? Inflation is going to be an issue, and we're going to start seeing that. And you're probably already seeing it with the increase of cost of almost everything. He goes into is gold and silver useful, and he was saying he traded all of his for ammunition, which is what it's used for, right? Because during the collapse, the gold and silver is not going to be. You're not going to want to hang on to it unless you have more items than you need to survive on. So the time that gold and silver comes into play is after the collapse, when the rebuild happens, and the rebuild will happen. It's just, and then so at that point, if you have gold, silver, other types of precious metals or gems or things of high value, that's when they come into play, and you can get what you need with those. After then, when either a new currency is started, or maybe they just start creating new coinage to use. Who knows? He's going to hit, and the next question going off earlier is, was salt expensive? Salt can be used for so many different things. Cleaning capabilities. It could be used for preserving food, whether it's canning or salting food. Having lots and lots of salt can really do you a lot of good in a time when you don't have access to things that you normally do. He talks about firearms, ammunition. We've talked about that. I'm going to keep going. The next one is, what about security? All right, this one's a big thing for me. Here's why. If you think that you're going to get through a societal collapse on your 30-acre farm, or your nearest neighbor is 5-6 miles away, unless you've got a lot of family who lives in the city who's going to come out and provide reinforcements, you're going to need to think of a different plan, because you cannot keep watch for 24 hours a day. It is impossible to sustain that kind of security by yourself. With me, it's me and my wife, and we have 4 children. My wife her sole responsibility needs to be on taking care of the kids, and my sole responsibility needs to be providing protection and providing what they need. Living in a neighborhood, some people don't want to live in a neighborhood because they're afraid of who their neighbors are. If you have established relationships with your neighbors, and then established good relationships with them to where you all trust each other a little bit, when it comes down to where y'all really need to lean on each other, those relationships will grow even more. And at that point, you all can set up security in your neighborhood to be able to provide safety for your wives and families in that neighborhood. So in the instance of a societal collapse, your neighborhood effectively becomes a village, right? So someone needs to step up and start leading that village. Preferably it's somebody with some leadership experience that has some combat experience, someone who is willing to make hard decisions. If you all ever read the book by William Fortune, 1 Second After, or 1 Second Later, it's either after or later, I can't remember. I've got it on my bookshelf behind me somewhere, but I'll find it later. Anyway, one of the situations that really stuck out to me in that point in that novel was they had to make the decision to execute a guy who's a criminal in the area because they can't afford to put anyone on him for 24 hours a day to make sure he doesn't hurt anybody else. Because at that point, manpower becomes a commodity. And because they weren't able to provide that security, at that point you have to make hard decisions. Like, if you have a guy who's a thief, how do you deal with a thief? Well, how did they used to deal with thieves? They would either brand them or cut off a hand, right? So if you brand somebody, you put something on the forehead where everybody can see that they're a thief, then to keep them away from your valuables. Or if you cut off their hand, that's another way of knowing them or marking them. You may not need to go to the extreme of executing them, but at that point you need to, be able to make hard decisions like that. Like, if you all end up having an epidemic that happens in your neighborhood after the collapse, who's in charge of, disposing of the bodies? Who's in charge of providing burial for the bodies? And where do you do it? And do you have an area near your neighborhood that you can safely do it? Thinking of instances of hygiene, and maybe it's somebody's backyard, and that person, he may have the best place for it, but they don't want it in their backyard. And at that point, you need to be able to come up with a good compromise for that person. Maybe you need to move them to another house in the neighborhood that is vacant, and give them that house, and then using that yard for that purpose. So having leadership that can make hard decisions in a neighborhood, and being able to provide security schedules, maybe 3 or 4 of you, are on a 4-hour shift where y'all patrol the neighborhood, and then you have a front gate, do y'all establish, and you have 2 guys on there for 6 hours a day, and whatever it is. But you need somebody to be able to step up and lead and do that. And then moving on down, he's talking about hygiene and toilets. He's like, at that point, in that instance, if you don't have running water, you have to make a latrine, and you have to make it as hygienic as possible, because the last thing you need is disease to run rampant through and your neighborhood, because access to doctors is going to be at a premium. If you've got a paramedic or a nurse practitioner or a nurse in your neighborhood, you need to treat them like gold, because they are going to be your access to medical treatment that you need. And he goes on later on in the next section in number 11 is how do they treat the sick and injured. And this sums it up perfectly, and which is a big issue that a lot of us are going to have when the situation arises. And he says, and I'm quoting here, "It ain't the movies. People died. Many died from infections of superficial wounds. I had antibiotics for 3 to 4 uses for his family, of course." It's the end of quote. But we need to be prepared to deal with death. And we know as Catholics that, this world that we live in is the suffering we go through in order to hopefully be in heaven with God for eternity. And a big issue that's happened since the 60s is we have, especially Catholics, have been poorly catechized to be afraid of death. And we should not be afraid of death, because if you are living life correctly, then you need to be prepared to face and have a good death. And death is going to be a thing that comes up. Earlier when I talked about having an idea of where your food comes from, being able to make your own food, whether it be, you need to kill your own chickens, or you have rabbits for meat. You need to be intimately involved with that, because a farmer who does his own killing of his livestock treats them much better than a factory farm does. And we should treat animals with respect and only take from them what we need. We shouldn't kill them needlessly. And hunters and farmers who do their own killing know that. And anybody out there who does hunting or who does farming or has family who does that, then you are intimately aware of that fact. All right. So that's I kind of glanced over the Selco article, and there's more later on that I might go over from him. He is a wealth of knowledge. He really went through it, and he has no problem sharing it with other people because he knows the large learning curve that he had when it first happened, and he wants to mitigate that for other people. All right. So now moving on, I want to move on to why we prepare. What are some of the things that we can expect or that could happen, that are most likely to happen, because you have and if any of y'all listen to Mike Shelby from Gray Zone Warlord, he also runs Forward Observer. He's a former Intel analyst. He's a guy I've known for a few years. I've done a little bit of work for him. He's a great guy. If you have a chance, go over and subscribe to his Forward Observer roll-ups every day, because that will give you a better idea than anything that you read on the news, right? Stay if you can, and I'm guilty of this as well, just because of the nature of what I used to do in the Marines, but stay away from the news if you can, and allow someone else to kind of curate it for you, someone who does it for a living, because it's only going to make your anxiety levels increase, and it's only going to make you more angry at the world, at what's going on, no matter what side of the political divide you're on. Just stay. There's no reason really, other than to watch the local news, for what's going on locally, and even then, you may want to be sparingly doing that. But there's no reason to be constantly on Twitter or constantly on reading, whoever, Fox News, CNN, MSNBC. There's no reason to do that. They're pushing a narrative, and it's the narrative they're pushing is whatever way they want to try and push the country. But like I said, forwardobserver.com is Mike's place that he puts out his roll-ups. It's well worth the money. I think it's like $10 a month if you want to do it. But he gives you a roll-up every day, and you'll get information, and he kind of gives his analyst opinion of what's going on, and he's got a lot of good. He's a very good wealth of knowledge there for that. But moving on into some of these things that we can kind of expect. The first thing that we're going to run into in the event, whether it's a balkanization, whether there's some type of power outage for a prolonged period of time, or there's a collapse of governmental services like police and fire, the first thing that's going to affect everyone is food insecurity. Most people do not have more than the FEMA required, for the FEMA recommended 3 days of food per person in your household, and 1 gallon of water per person in your household for 5 to 7 days. Most people don't have that. Most people are going to the grocery store or going out to eat every other day. They just don't have those kind of. There's just been no need for it, and so they don't keep it in the house. So food insecurity is going to be an issue, and when it comes to food insecurity is the highest reason, or the most prevalent reason, for civil conflict. It is almost exclusively a phenomenon of countries with low levels of economic development and high levels of food insecurity. Think of any of the countries in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, even Northern Africa, where they have low levels of economic development or low levels of economic capacity, which could happen in the event of a societal collapse here in the United States. And then there's high levels of food insecurity, because if most of our food's coming from the Midwest or Mexico, and you live in Florida, it's going to be a while before you ever see a supermarket have food in it again. So being able to provide your own food, or at least have stockpiles of it to provide yourselves and your families, is going to mitigate a lot of stress and mitigate a lot of anxiety that you're going to go through when you start seeing other people go through the same things. And just to give you an idea of how secure our food supply is, right now we are on a just-in-time inventory capacity in the United States. What that means is you'll see a truck come into a supermarket or Walmart or whatever every 3 days because they have nothing in the back as far as food goes. And they might have a little bit, but not much at all. That means every 3 days they're restocking everything on the shelves. There's nothing in the back for them, and the reason for that is because they found that it saves on cost on warehouses in order to do that. So if the trucks stop coming, then you're going to see massive issues happen. And for those of you that are truckers, if you happen to be listening to this, then you're aware of the logistics issues that's happening with your trucks. If anybody's looked at buying a house lately, they've seen the skyrocketing prices of homes, and there's a couple of factors in there. Where one of those factors is the cost of timber. Timber is not the supply isn't low. That's not the issue. The issue is the supplies at the ports, and it can't get from the ports to where it needs to go. The reason it can't get from the ports to where it needs to go is because these trucks, there's not enough truck drivers to get them out. Two, there's an issue with a lot of these trucks that are going down for maintenance, and the parts aren't there to fix them. Okay, so when the trucks stop going, I will just give you a layout of what is expected when trucks stop. Within the first 24 hours, you can expect a delivery of medical supplies to the affected area will cease. So if you are dependent on insulin and you only have weeks left and the trucks stop, you've basically got a week's left before you start having some major decisions you have to make. After 24 hours, hospitals will run out of basic supplies. Service stations will begin to run out of fuel. Anybody seen when the hurricane came through, or even when the snowstorm came through Texas and caused the issue there? A lot of places run out of fuel. When the pipeline went down for a day due to quote unquote hacking, we saw fuel outages barely here in Alabama. It didn't really affect us so much, but there was parts of North Carolina and Virginia that didn't have fuel for a week, just for being down for that couple of days. Also, within 24 hours of truck stopping, manufacturers using the just-in-time manufacturing will develop component shortages. U.S. mail and other package delivery will cease. With one-day food shortages will begin to develop. Automobile fuel availability and delivery will dwindle, leading to skyrocketing prices and long lines at gas pumps. Right? That's just after 24 hours. What happens in 2 to 3 days? 2 to 3 days of the trucks not driving. Food shortages will escalate, especially in the face of people hoarding, or there's going to be consumer panic. Supplies of essentials such as bottled water, powdered milk, canned meat, at major retailers, it's going to be gone. It will no longer be there. ATMs will run out of cash. Banks will be unable to process transactions because they only have a certain amount of reserves at the bank. They're only federally required to have so much there at that specific location, so they will be completely out of cash. By this time, service stations will be completely run out of fuel. You will very rarely find a fuel station with fuel at that point. Keep in mind also, garbage will start piling up in urban and suburban areas. There's no trucks to come around to pick it up because fuel's gone. So what are you going to do with your trash? And then container ships will sit idle in ports, and rail transport will be disrupted, eventually coming to a standstill. That's just after 2 to 3 days, right? Then after a week, automobile travel will cease due to a lack of fuel. Hospitals will begin to exhaust their oxygen supplies. So if you have a loved one that's in the hospital, after that first day, they're already starting to see basic essentials gone, right? After a week, they've probably exhausted all their oxygen supplies. If you have a loved one that's on any type of oxygen or need for oxygen, COPD, emphysema, things like that, then at that point you're going to have to start making some hard decisions. After the second week, clean water supply will begin to run dry. After the fourth week, the nation's clean water supply will be exhausted. It will be gone. And how are you going to filter water at that point? There are a lot of videos out there that you can find on YouTube to learn how to filter water easily, and it's cheap. Using things such as charcoal, sand, and rocks in 5-gallon buckets. You can do a lot. Most people out there that are probably listening to this either own a Berkey water filter or know somebody who does. In a Berkey water filter, you can run pond water through, and it's potable. Uh, there are ways to filter water at that point. Learn them. I'm not going to go on them here because other channels will do them much better than I have. I know last podcast I was talking about I'm going to be putting in a rain barrel. I was actually evaluating my situation here at my house. I am putting in some rain barrels, but there's a gentleman who does a system that I'm just going to purchase from him, or maybe I might do some barter with him. But I will be setting up an ISO container at my house where I can hide it pretty easily. To where it's out of sight by most people at my house. So I will be putting that in, and I might do a video on that showing y'all how I'm doing that, why I'm doing that, things like that. All right. So following the issue of food insecurity, I want to go into something that is kind of a hot topic right now. If anybody does any type of weather watching or know guys who do, the solar geomagnetic disturbances are starting to pick up. So just to give you an idea what a geomagnetic disturbance is, solar superstorms can generate a natural EMP over a very large area. For one example, the Carrington event in 1859 is expected to happen again. NASA estimates, I think, the likelihood of such an event is between 10 to 12% per decade, making it very likely that we will be affected by a solar superstorm within a matter of decades. We're actually overdue at this point. Such an event like this would black out grids and other life-sustaining critical infrastructures, putting many lives at risk. On top of that, then you have the issue of the weaponization of geomagnetic disturbances. Russia, China, and North Korea all have the capability to conduct a nuclear EMP against the United States. Little caveat, my time in the military. There is a satellite that goes over the United States twice a day. That satellite is owned by North Korea. That satellite puts out no information, and it doesn't seem to receive any information. It crosses over the eastern seaboard, and then basically waves down into California. The going theory right now amongst people who are familiar with the situation is that satellite is actually a EMP that is waiting to be given the signal to go off at any time. Now, with it going over the United States twice a day, it could hit basically anywhere. Now, keep in mind it's only one, so depending on the altitude of that satellite, it theoretically could affect 1/3 to 1/2 of the United States. So it wouldn't affect the whole United States. But the issue that comes with the EMP is most of it's theoretical as well. We don't know how it would affect our current situation in the United States. A few years ago, President Trump put in a bill and signed an executive order to fortify our electrical grid. I don't know how much of that's been done, but we have no idea what will actually happen. Have you ever seen a movie like, was it War of the Worlds with Tom Cruise? All the electricity, it causes an overflow, which burns out a lot of the electrical equipment. And the only things that work are, vehicles that don't really work on any type of electrical equipment. I think he had to get a new, I can't remember what it was. I can't remember what part it was in his like beat up van to get it to working again. But that may or may not be the case. We don't know. We won't know until it happens. Whether it's an EMP or it's a coronal mass ejection, like the Carrington event, we have no idea how it will affect us. But be prepared for the worst case scenario. Another aspect is a cyber attack. We've already know that the Iranians and the Chinese have access to our infrastructure. President Biden revoked a executive order by President Trump that the Chinese are now going to be given the availability to provide parts and other access to our electrical infrastructure. So they, at any time, our infrastructure could go down by a cyber attack. Um, and just to give you an idea what that looks like, let me just go over a little bit about what the Carrington event was. The Carrington event was a solar superstorm, basically, in 1859. A flare erupted on the sun, blasted high energy light and charged particles of the Earth. It produced brilliant auroras as far south as Hawaii and I believe Cuba. It destroyed telegraph equipment. It burned up the lines and it shocked operators and ignited telegraph paper. Carrington level flare today would likely overload the entire power grid to the entire world. And in that event, when that happens, you have a whole cascade of events that happen after that. You're going to have no TV, radio, or phone service, no way to communicate. Even you ham radio guys, unless you've got something buried in the backyard in a Faraday cage of some sort, that's going to be burned up too. Gas pumps will be inoperable because they work by electricity and computers. Street lights will be out. There will be no mass transit. Any planes that are in the air when it happens will fall to the ground. At that point, there will be no running water because that's all, unless you're on a gravity system, solely gravity system, which very few cities are on anymore, you're going to have no running water. Most stoves and refrigerators will be inoperable, so you won't be able to cook the food that you have unless you have a grill. You're going to have to, if it's during the cold months, you're going to have to melt snow and boil it to be able to have drinking water. Oil and natural gas flows will stop. Hospitals will have to operate in the dark. And even emergency lighting will not work because it'll get burned up, most likely from the EMP. CO poisoning and house fires will increase because people will be cooking in their house, or they'll be lighting a fireplace that they've never used before, and they've never done what they needed to do to make sure it was safe. And then how long before the looting starts? Because people don't have what they need, they're going to start doing looting and taking what they need. Because if you're a father with 4 children, and say you're a single father with 4 children, and your children are starving, you're going to do what you need to do to get them food. And whether that's begging or it's going somewhere that's unsafe to get to somewhere that has food, or you might need to go out and take it. At that point, recovery is going to heavily depend on the neighboring regions that may be unaffected by the blackout. So say, for example, the blackout reaches as far west as like Arkansas. Can Texas come in and provide the means for recovery? But if the whole world is out, then we're effectively back to the Middle Ages at that point. Keeping that in mind, one thing you need to start doing is learning how to garden. Make your mistakes now. I can tell from my experience. I've done raised beds. I've planted in the ground. We're doing raised beds here now. Gardening is not easy. You need to be able to look for the signs where that becomes, whether it comes to insect infestation, disease in your crops, or just know when you need to water and when you need to not water. Know when perhaps you have an area of soil that is not good for planting crops. You need to make your mistakes now because it's too late when you're hungry. At that point, you are far too down the pipe in order to effectively do what you need to do. And then at that point, you are going to have to start making some choices that you probably are not comfortable with. These are all aspects of things that are what's called a most likely courses of action. The most likely course of action right now is our inventory, our just-in-time inventory is going to fail. Like I said, we're already seeing logistics issues. We're seeing, because of COVID, food issues throughout the world, and it's going to just keep getting worse because it's a cascading effect at this point. Then the most likely issue after that is going to be those trucks stopping, and then that is a follow on to the logistics issue. And it's all coming down to how are they going to get the food from the farm to the store, and how do we get to the store to get it? And if these logistics issues continue, then it's just going to keep getting worse. And then your final one, which is your most likely course of action, is going to be your coronal mass ejection or EMP. They're both the same thing. One is natural, one is man-made. In the event that happens, and a good idea to be able to identify that when it happens, because if you're at home on a day and it's sunny outside and the power goes out for no reason, and you go to check your phone and your phone won't turn on, you're more than likely that was an EMP, right? That's how I kind of subconsciously check for it, because being at where I live, the power goes out here for like no reason for like 30 seconds every now and then, and I'll instinctively pull up my phone as my phone turn on, because if my wife's at work when it happens, there's some planning that needs to take place on how she should react, and how I should react. If I'm home with the kids and she's at work, or I'm at work and she's at home with the kids, just a basic rudimentary plan, it would be, if she's at home with the kids and I'm out at work and it happens, she is not to do anything other than take care of the kids. I will make my way home somehow, right? If she's at work and I'm here with the kids, at that point, I may have to make the decision of finding a neighbor to take care of the kids while I'm gone, and I'm going to get my wife, right? And no matter how I need to do it, I'm going to go get her. I will be seen riding down the street in my daughter's bike if I have to, but I'm going to get my wife. With all these things, with all these aspects, going through the Selco article, and then going through some of the things that we can consider as our most likely courses of action, and why we need to start preparing our families and providing certain levels of stockpile as well. Your duty as a father is to provide for your family and protect your family. If you are not properly planning for these events that may happen in the future, you are failing your family. You need to step up, and you need to have those hard conversations with your wife. And if you need to sit down and give her article after article after article showing, how the logistics is an issue, or how there's droughts in the Midwest, or how, Mexico is having an issue providing the needs for its own area, so therefore it can't export food. You do that. If you have to sit down and make a PowerPoint to provide to her to get her on, you need to get her on the level, right? And if you're not on the level, you need to get yourself on the level. If you need to go down a YouTube rabbit hole looking at all these cases of issues going around the world, that's what you need to do. But you need to start providing for the instance that these things may happen. So that's going to wrap it up for this one. The next episode, we're going to go over what kind of my suggestions are on your needs if you're stockpiling. And I'll go over some things about, if you don't own a firearm, what firearm to get, or how to properly handle the firearm, and some other aspects of it, where to store it in the need. And then I'm probably gonna go over some security issues for the home as well. Some quick, easy things that you can do to help secure your home. So that'll be it for this week. Next week, I'll try and get it out on Monday. That way, those of you who are taking the time to listen, you can expect these on Mondays. I'm going to try and get more regular about this. But thanks for listening. If y'all have any questions, feel free to email me. The email will be in the description box of the video here on YouTube. Again, if y'all have any questions or anything, do not hesitate. You can find me on Twitter as well. That link will also be in the description of the video. Thanks, guys. Take care.